A major welfare reform is taking effect in Denmark, and for some recipients, the consequences could be devastating. One woman, Hilda, fears she may soon be homeless. Welfare shakeup in Denmark could leave recipients on the street. Today marks the launch of a new welfare reform in Denmark that is already sparking anxiety among vulnerable citizens. One of them is Hilda, who relies on cash benefits to survive. She now fears she could lose her home within a month. The reform is meant to incentivize employment, but critics say it puts extreme pressure on people who are already struggling. Social workers and advocacy groups warn that more people may face eviction, especially single adults with health or housing challenges. The government maintains that the new system is more fair and efficient, but time will tell how it impacts those at the bottom. I might lose my home. Welfare reform endangers ill woman in Odense. Hilda Bies has lived in Odense for many years. She has relied on welfare after becoming chronically ill following a surgery more than 15 years ago. While life has been difficult, she managed to stay afloat thanks to having a roof over her head. But now that roof is at risk. Starting August 1st, Hilda will see her welfare payment reduced as part of a national reform. On top of that, a special benefit known as Section 34, which helped cover rent when welfare wasn't enough, is being abolished. Effective July 1st, a new welfare reform takes effect in Denmark. The government, backed by the Social Democrats, SF, the Conservatives, and the Social Liberals, says the reform will simplify the system, help more people find work, and reduce the number of children in low-income families. But not everyone is celebrating. Several special support programs are being eliminated, including Section 34 of the Social Assistance Act, which currently helps welfare recipients pay their rent when basic support isn't enough. Social advocates are warning of serious consequences. We risk thousands more becoming homeless, says Kira West, chair of the Council for Socially Vulnerable People. Today, this housing subsidy is what allows many to keep a roof over their heads. Critics argue the reform may hurt the most vulnerable while trying to streamline the system. Starting July 1st, Denmark's new cash benefit system will take effect, with the goal of simplifying welfare, encouraging employment, and reducing child poverty. The reform was passed with broad political backing, but not without serious concern. One of the most controversial changes is the removal of Section 34, a rent subsidy that helped people on welfare cover housing costs. Kira West, chair of the Council for Socially Vulnerable People, warns the consequences could be severe. We risk thousands more becoming homeless, she says. West is especially worried about recipients who will now receive the minimum rate, around 6,500 Danish kroner per month, or less than 900 euros. There is simply too great a gap between what they can afford and the actual rent prices across most of the country, she adds. New welfare model in Denmark. Fewer support options, lower payouts. Starting July 1st, Denmark is overhauling its welfare system. The government says the goal is to make the system simpler and more efficient. That means removing a number of special benefits and replacing them with just 3 base rates: a minimum rate, a standard base rate, and a higher rate for specific cases. The standard base rate will now be aligned with the Danish student grant, known as SU. All rates, however, will be significantly lower than the previous welfare levels. Social workers and advocacy groups warn this could leave many without enough to live on. Kira West, from the Council for Socially Vulnerable People, says, "There is simply too great a gap between what people can afford and the rent prices we see across the country." The removal of Section 34, a rent subsidy for low-income citizens, only adds to the concern. B-roll suggestions, clean infographic, old system, new 3-tier rates, SU letter or student budget illustration, individual looking at bills with calculator visual of apartment rental prices in Denmark welfare reform, sparks concern from social workers and advocates. Denmark's new cash benefit system is meant to simplify casework and reduce administrative burden for local municipalities. It replaces a complex system with just 3 rates: minimum, basic, and elevated. But behind the promise of simplicity lies deep concern from professionals on the front lines. Sina Ferch, chair of the Danish Association of Social Workers, says, "We are incredibly worried about removing tools we use to help homeless people move on from shelters and to prevent evictions for vulnerable citizens." Social workers warn that the elimination of special support schemes, including rent subsidies, strips away safety nets they rely on daily. Advocates fear that combining lower benefits with fewer support options may lead to more people losing their homes. New welfare law could leave the most vulnerable behind. On July 1st, Denmark replaced a patchwork of welfare rules with a simpler 3-tier benefit system. The government says it's meant to help people get jobs and reduce child poverty. But critics warn the poorest will pay the price. One of the most controversial cuts is the removal of Section 34, which offered rent subsidies to low-income individuals. Many worry this will push more people toward homelessness. Signe Ferk, head of the Danish Association of Social Workers, calls it deeply concerning. Now Kjartan Emjelen, vice chair of SAND, the National Homeless Organization, adds his voice. "I'm part of that special housing support scheme myself, and no one really knows what the future looks like for the most vulnerable. That's scary," he says. Political showdown over welfare reform. The newly implemented welfare reform has sparked fierce debate, even inside the Danish parliament. The Red-Green Alliance, Enhedslisten, has issued a strong warning. The most vulnerable are at risk when housing subsidies are removed. Victoria Velasquez, the party's employment and social affairs spokesperson, says, "The government talks about simplifying the system, but in reality, it means people may lose their homes." The party fears that those already on the lowest benefits will no longer be able to cover rent once key supports disappear. But Venstre, the Liberal Party, strongly defends the reform. Kim Valentine, vice chair of the Employment Committee, says, "Critics say welfare reform targets the wrong people." Advocacy groups are pushing back hard against claims that the new welfare system will help more people into jobs. Kira West, chair of the Council for Socially Marginalized People, argues that the reform is aimed at the wrong group. Those with complex challenges like mental illness or social issues are not motivated by financial pressure. They need a safety net, and Section 34 was part of that. The government has eliminated Section 34 of the Social Assistance Act, which allowed extra rent support for the poorest citizens. Signe Ferk, president of the Danish Association of Social Workers, adds, "You don't get people into work by making them poorer." Both organizations are calling for emergency action from Parliament. Kira West appeals. Christiansborg must act fast. Municipalities need the power to provide emergency support, even as a temporary fix. Real help doesn't come from keeping people on welfare. It comes from getting them into work. And he emphasizes that the new system is designed to encourage job seeking and reduce dependency, not to maintain the status quo. Thank you for watching InfoNews Media TV. For more legal news and updates from Denmark, subscribe to our channel.